Welcome back, everybody, to our summary and commentary series on Plato's The Republic. I've got Dr. Jim Madden here. We are...
Oh, wait, I just flashed my students' grades distribution onto this. Ooh.
Oops. We are finally to the famous allegory of the cave.
Ooh.
All right.
Ooh.
So, yeah, big one.
Big one.
You know,
Big one.
obviously, hugely... probably the most famous allegory in all of philosophy. One could probably make that argument, but also probably one of the most misunderstood, right? Because it's frequently taken out of context, as we've emphasized before. Like, you got to at least understand book 6 if you're going to make sense of book 7.
Exactly.
And we're going to try and do some summary commentary, and then, of course, Q&A, my dear gentle listeners. So please submit whatever questions you have.
As always.
We'll jam around at the end. But Jim, great to be with you as always.
Great to be with you, man.
Yeah, kick us off wherever you think we should start. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, I feel it's a privilege to be able to do this, right? For us to like be able to, to come on and with an audience and talk about the Republic, right? And now the allegory of the cave. But this is pretty cool, right? This may be a sign that, especially like what we were talking about off the air, not all hope is lost, right? That there are.
There's yet a spark.
There's a spark, right? Like there's the light has not completely dimmed on Western civilization just yet.
And there's still Mission Barbecue, which I had for lunch.
There is Mission Barbecue, right? Definitely. And by the way, I'm beginning fall break, so there we are.
Excellent.
Right?
Yes. This is good. It really is. Let me just emphasize that it is a treat to be able to do this, and it is awesome to have gotten so much good feedback. So it's not just Jim and I having fun. It seems like people have really gotten a lot of benefit out of the series, and that makes us very happy to hear as well. So thank you all. Yeah.
I often say to my students that they have to ask me questions and stuff, because I would be happy to come to the room, even if they weren't there, and just talk to myself about Plato. Right? so the fact that
as I often do in my morning walks. Right?
As I often do, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so the fact that someone's out there listening and giving us feedback is great, right? So excellent, because we would be doing it anyway. But yeah.
By the way, Callum says before we start, ask Jim's thoughts on Fury versus Wilder. We're going to save that to the end because we're going to do the product first, then we'll have fun at the end, and maybe we'll figure in some type of tie-in or something. I don't know.
Yeah, well, partly because you're going to shame me.
Yeah, we'll get there though. But for now, let's keep the main things the main thing, Jim. Where do we start with our summary of book 7?
Okay, so we ended in book 6, right? We ended in book 6, and we're told in book 6 that the most important thing, the one thing, the overseers. Actually, we get mentioned occasionally of the overseers in the Republic, and we're never quite told who they are. Interesting. Okay, one of many spooky things about this book. But we're told that the overseers cannot compromise on the education of the guardians. No way, shape, or form, right?
Right.
And that's why my read of the Republic is a treatise on education. It is the question of what would enlightenment be? What would it be to be an enlightened individual or human being? And what is the process that one would have to go through to get there? Okay. Because it's quite like, what is justice really? What is the good life? Right? What would it mean, right, to be wise? And then how do we get you there? So it is a treatise on education. All right, and we're told like the end of education for the guardians. Okay, with the guardians, like as opposed to the auxiliaries, is going to be a philosophical education. Okay, and we have to be careful about confusions here because Plato is not saying in the city everybody would have this education, right? It's only the people with the right metal in the soul, the best metal in the soul, would have this philosophical education, okay? But it's important to note, the point of the Republic is not really the city, okay? It's using the city to explain the individual, so it's the individual, all right? And so within every person, if you're going to live the good life, Plato does think you have to have a philosophical education at some level, right? Because you need to have a guardian within you. You need to have a philosopher king within you that's going to govern things, okay?
Right on.
So I do think whatever your station in life is, this is relevant, right? Even if you're not going to be a member of the guardian class in the ideal city, right? All of us have to have a guardian class within ourselves.
Indeed.
Right.
Indeed.
Otherwise we're going to go off the rails in Plato's view. And by the way, he's right about this. Okay. All right. So probably more on that in subsequent episodes too. All right.
Mhm.
So we set the stage in book 6 that education has been the point all along. What kind of education? The education of the philosopher is the most important, because it's to be a well-educated philosopher is going to get you the most good, and to be an ill-educated one to get you the worst, right? Both in the city and in the soul.
That's right.
And then we get, okay, so what is a philosophical education? It's education that results in knowledge and not belief, right? Whereas belief is what is concerned about what is becoming, what is mixed between being and nothing, right?
That's right.
And knowledge is what is concerned with about what it is, right? Which is unmixed between being and nothing. It just is being. Okay.
Yeah.
It's the ultimate essences of things. It's
What
knowing
is
the ultimate truths.
eternal, right?
What is eternal? Yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
And that, that more or less explains what's going on in the divided line. All right. And so the sort of least relevant things to education are the least real things, which are images, right? Literally artistic images. Okay.
Now, Jim, do you think it's fair to say that the allegory of the cave and the divided line are really trying to teach the same thing?
Yeah,
Or
I think.
Or do you think there's relevant differences between the two?
I think they are. There's a considerable Venn diagram overlapping them. Okay. But I think what you have in the divided line of the cave is an ontology. Okay. Okay. I'm not part of the divided line of the cave. I mixed it. The divided line, you have an ontology. In the cave, I think what you're getting is the practical educative upshot of abiding that ontology.
That maps onto that, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So given the ontology of the divided line, this is what education would be.
Yeah, and that's good, because that helps to avoid redundancy, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, why are we doing? Is he just explaining? Is the cave just an explanation of divided line for the little people? No, the book is not intended for little people.
Yeah.
Right. It's to add this practical upshot of it. Yeah.
Here's your how-to. Here's the what is. Now here's the how-to.
Got it. Because like, what would it be to be educated? It would be to be operating at the top of the divided line. Okay.
Right.
Okay. Now, but what will that process actually look like? Okay. And so then what we get in book 7 is the allegory as a way of explaining what that process would be like. A very, as I'm going to say, pessimistic view of it, as we'll see. Okay. An important point in book 7, I don't know how it is in other translations, but in Reeves, it's translated as, Socrates goes out of his way to say, education is a complete turning of the whole body, right? The complete turning of the whole person. So, and so you're going to see, it's already there in the divided line. It's obvious in the cave, is what it is to be educated is to turn away from becoming and face being entirely. Okay. It's almost like, I like to think about it, Lot's wife from the Old Testament, right? For the educated person, there should be no looking back. Like, you've turned away from this other thing. Okay. It's important to note that for Plato, and I think this is when we get into, and I hope we do, Aristotle at some point, education is not synthetic. It's not like taking the top of the divided line and using it, in a synthetic act to make sense of what's going on in the lower orders of the line. It is to turn away from the lower orders of the line and just ascend to and look at the top.
To get away from it entirely.
To get away from it. It's a complete turning. There's nothing left, right? Like, you've become a foreigner in the land of image.
Right.
Right. Okay. And that's very important for how this works out. Okay. As we'll see, maybe when we talk about Aristotle a bit, that's not Aristotle's view. Okay. Right. It's not a complete turning away. Okay, so the allegory, we're probably mostly familiar with it from a popular standpoint, but the way it works is Socrates says, okay, let's suppose you have these people, they've been in this cave forever, they've been chained up there. We're given no explanation as to why they're chained there or anything like that.
But they can't turn their necks.
They can't turn their necks. It's a really elaborate set. And I know, and please don't pick at the example. It drives me nuts. Anyway, why couldn't they turn their heads? Okay.
Right. Just shut up.
Just shut up. They can't turn their heads. I don't know. They just
can't.
Right?
All right.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know. Right. They can't. Right. Their ears have been screwed to boards. I don't know. Right. Okay. All right. That would do it. All right. Yeah, right. Anyway, and so their entire experience is all they can see are shadows that are projected on the wall of this cave. Okay. And the projection is happening because you have people behind the prisoners who are themselves behind a wall, holding up puppets on sticks that are shining, and there's a fire behind them that are casting shadows from the puppets onto the wall of the cave. Okay. I find it interesting that Plato goes out of his way to note that there are people doing this, right? Like he didn't make the puppet masters some, celestial beings or, some animals, or the puppets are just there. There are people involved in the projection of these images, which I think is an interesting fact, right?
Indeed.
Okay.
Indeed.
Right. The social situation is not entirely transparent. Oh, very good. Look at that. We have an image.
There we go. Look at that. We have a little visual representation today on the Pat Flynn show.
I love it. Well played. Okay, so one of the prisoners is able to get woke, as they say these days, right? and manages to free himself and look away from the images. And he gets behind the wall and he sees that there's a puppet show going on here, that the light that is casting this, and this is important, the light that is casting this is not light itself, it's fire. Okay. And you think of it like, fire is not the ultimate source of energy on the earth, right? It is an expression of an energy on the earth that comes from somewhere else, ultimately the sun, right? It's going to be important. Okay. So this prisoner realizes it's all a put on, and he, goes through this process of getting out of the cave. Okay. And it's very, very difficult. Like, Plato has Socrates go out of his way to say how hard it is, how terrible it is. Right. And it's just difficult. It's difficult. And he climbs and he climbs and he climbs, and he gets out of the cave, and there's sunlight out there. Okay. And when you've been in the darkness your whole life, it's going to be hard to look, hard to see in that light. The light itself. It's interesting. The source of illumination will actually be experienced as a kind of blindness to the uninitiate. Yeah. I think it's very important for Plato, right? The very source of enlightenment will be experienced as a kind of ignorance, right? Until you're enlightened. Okay, so the prisoner goes out, he kind of looks around, he can't stand, he goes back in the cave, he comes back out, he's like, keeps testing the waters. Eventually he gets comfortable enough with the light that he can look in a little pond or something and see reflections of things in there, but he still can't look up to see in the light yet. So he's got to keep working, he keeps working. Eventually he gets where he can see, not in our image we have in the video here, not just a puppet of a bird, but he can see a real bird, right? And he likes that, it's cool, and he keeps working at it, and eventually he tries to see the sun. Okay. And he can't really look at the sun without frying his eyes, but he can kind of glimpse it, like quick look away, quick look away. Right. And, and I believe right in the allegory, Socrates, explains, well, what is the sun? It is not what is seen. It is the source by which we see all things, right? Like the energy of the fire ultimately comes from the energy of the sun. Right. Okay. And so the sun is not one thing to be seen. It is that which makes all things that can be seen manifested to us. It shows us everything.
Okay? Yeah, not that which, but that by which.
That by which, yeah. So then the sun is not just one object among all the other objects. It's the object, if it is an object at all, that allows other things to be. Okay, to be for us. Okay. And so Plato says, look, what is this? Or Socrates says, what is this? The sun is the good. It's the form of the good. Is that by which we are oriented to all things, right? The source of all our striving, in the sense of the end of all of our striving. And then once we've seen that, we can see that that's what illuminates everything for us. Okay. So now this lucky prisoner, now the free person, right? It's like, okay, yeah, I've glimpsed the sun. I know the cave isn't the whole story. I know where real reality lies. I've turned my whole body and looked away, right? And he goes back to the cave, right? And he says, look, guys, this is all a put on, right? It's not the real deal. There are dudes behind the wall tricking you with puppets, right? And let's go and let's go see the sun. And it'll be really hard, right? Be really difficult. It's a difficult life, and it's going to hurt a lot, and you'll never really get to see it. But hey, come with me, right?
Right.
And so they decide to
not take him up on that.
They don't take him up on it, and he persists. So they eventually they kill him. They kill him, right? Like all enlightened people. So I mean, it's a not so thinned reference to Socrates himself.
Yeah. We know who we're getting.
We know who we're really talking about here. Okay, so they kill him. Okay. And so you get what is it? It's an allegory of what education is, but it's pessimistic, right? I mean, so and now keep in mind where this fits in the grand narrative of the Republic is Socrates has promised us that he's going to show that what justice is, like what the good life is, and why it is good in and of itself, and why it is good for its consequences. Okay.
Mhm.
Well, what just happened to the only just man, like the philosopher here, right? The process was arduous and terrible. It was
Mhm.
hard. So it doesn't seem like it was good in itself. And
Mhm.
its consequence was his death. Okay.
Right. Mhm.
So Plato is digging a deep hole for Socrates here,
Mhm.
right? In terms of ultimately answering the question of the book, because it looks like justice or the way of wisdom, right, really sucks, right,
Yeah.
in and of itself and for its consequences. Okay.
Mhm. Seems just like a bag of grief, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
a bag of grief, right? Okay. It's interesting. Some other things that like get less noted in book 7 is, you get this discussion of all these disciplines, right? And, like, so, okay, so what would the education literally look like? Well, Plato says we're going to start out by teaching you calculation. So like he literally
Mhm.
means like arithmetic and
Yeah,
with
math. He's big on the
yeah,
math. Yeah.
with a
Mhm.
mind by calculation. I think he means like accounting, like practical math, like
Mhm.
how to keep the books in dad's business.
Mhm.
Okay. And why? Well, because we have to start you out with something practical because we're tactile animals and all that. But eventually he thinks if you study calculation, if you study accounting, you're going to say, but what are numbers?
Right.
Right.
Right. Right.
And you're
Right.
going to look away from the particularities of dad's bookkeeping and you're going to
Mhm.
look toward the more universal.
Right.
Okay.
It's a way to go from the realm of the becoming
Yeah.
to the realm of the
Yeah.
eternal. Right.
And
Mhm.
it's interesting. And then he says, what we'll
So
do
so
is,
yeah, so is it fair to say he's less interested in, say, the practice of mathematics and more interested in the philosophy of
yeah, the
mathematics?
philosophy of
Right. Yeah.
mathematics. Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. But an interesting, he thinks you're going to really, it's going to get off the ground only if you first learned it as a trade,
Right. Yeah. That you actually
right?
have to do math
You
first.
actually do it. But then at some point, the reflective person will say, but what are the
What,
numbers?
yeah. What
Right.
are
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
What does the
And
number
then,
do? Right. Uh-huh.
and he does the same thing with geometry because remember, like geometry was originally something that was designed for agricultural purposes, like how do we divide up the land and stuff like
Mhm.
that. It was come up with for architectural purposes, and so he wants you to begin to learn the practical aspect of geometry.
Mhm.
Okay, but then eventually you're going to say, but wait, what are shapes? Right?
Mhm.
What are these beings that don't change that are the shapes? Okay,
Mhm.
and does the same thing with astronomy. Like you begin to learn astronomy by being a navigator. Okay. But at some point you're going to ask, but what are the absolute laws of all this motion? Right.
Mhm.
And so I think this is important. We miss this in our education with people. Like, what we do now is we take people and we dump them directly to the top of the line. Learn abstraction, son. Right.
Right.
Learn in the least concrete, most abstract circumstances you possibly can. Right.
Mhm. Mhm.
And Plato is the guy most for getting to the top of the line that's ever lived. Right.
Mhm.
He does not start people there. He starts by teaching them a trade.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Starts by teaching them a trade. It's something nitty gritty and tactile so that we can work your way up, right?
Mhm.
But he wants complete turning away, but it begins by learning a trade. I find this fascinating, right?
Mhm.
So for like Plato, the idea that you're going to just dump somebody into, mathematics without like first teaching them something practical with it.
It's so funny
Yeah.
because it's so the
He would not
opposite.
like our school system.
Yeah, because I mean, what is the common complaint of so many kids who are dumped into math classes? Is like, what is this good for? They want to
What's
see
this
the
good for?
practical side of it.
Yeah.
Plato's the opposite. He's like, first we'll show you what it's good for, and then we'll show you what
Yeah.
it is, right?
Plato alert. You just said it. This is where I was going. What is it good for? Okay. And what is the light that illumes everything for us? It is the good.
Good. Mhm.
Yeah. So we have to begin the search in something that we can see the good of.
Mhm.
Even though he thinks ultimately to really go after the good is to turn away from those very things that illume it for us, right? Do you see that? But it's only under the description of the good that the human being gets off the ground,
Yeah. Mhm.
right?
By the way,
It's just brilliant. It's
dude,
just brilliant,
yeah,
man. Yeah.
it is brilliant and it's magisterial and it just reminds me, it gives me warm fuzzy feelings about sort of one of my first encounters with Lonergan's Insight because he's
Yeah.
kind of making those moves at the
Yeah.
beginning of Insight when he's contemplating how we go from examining, essentially like a wheel with spokes to coming
Yeah.
to the concept of what a circle is, right?
Yeah.
And how
Yeah.
and but it starts with something very concrete, very tangible, right? Anyway,
Yeah. And you have to be involved in a reality that resists your desires and your whims to like become like to see the no, I need to know something, right?
Yeah.
Okay, it's that trade level of it, right? And then you're only going to really take that up in as much as you see it as constituting something good for you, and that begins the march. And now Plato is the least pragmatist philosopher to ever walk the earth, okay, but he does see that the search begins, education begins in practicality. And I think this is something like by Plato's standards, we are utterly failing at. We are utterly and completely failing at, right?
For sure.
Except in certain homeschool.
Except in certain homeschools. So, all right. So, excellent.
Take the kids to jiu-jitsu class, man.
Yeah, excellent overview, Jim. Before we turn to questions here, what are any other key points that people should get out of book 7?
Okay, this is my favorite part of book 7. Okay, if you go, I won't read the whole thing too, but I refer the listener to in the margins 519a all the way over to 521a. Okay, in Reeve it's 212 to 214. Okay, and the issue comes up between Socrates and the guys about whether or not it was right for the philosopher to go back to the cave.
To go back in.
Okay,
big question. Right?
And Socrates says, "Hey, look, man." No matter what, in the cave, things are going to be run badly. You will always have the least educated people are going to run things inside the cave. Like the guys behind the walls, right, are not, because as we'll see, there's good reasons for why he thinks that going down. But the guys behind the walls are not going to be good, right? Not going to be the best, all right, because they want to be the guy behind the wall. They're not concerned about turning away. They're concerned about being the guy behind the wall, right? Which means they're not going to be philosophers, right? Okay, so it's interesting. So Socrates is saying, don't expect it to go well. All right. And then the Glaucon Adeimantus say, but doesn't the philosopher have a duty to go back in the cave? Doesn't the philosopher have a duty to go back in the city? Okay, because it's the city that has reared him. It's like the city got him to where he is. Okay. Do you see that? Like he there's a debt of justice with a small j that you owe to the city. Okay.
Right.
Interestingly, in the Republic, Socrates says, don't owe him anything, man. Like you didn't become enlightened because of them. You became enlightened in spite of
them. Right.
Yeah. And Plato doesn't have Socrates say it's wrong to go back down there, but he does have him say you have no duty to do it.
It's fine if you want to, but it's not obligatory. Yeah. Right.
And it's not going to go well. Like you say, like you're just going to get yourself killed and that's it. Okay. Now rewind this thing back to the Crito. Okay. And the Crito is, it's one of the earlier dialogues by Plato, at least in the way we order them. And it's recounting basically while Socrates was on death row. Okay. So he gets found guilty. There was a festival of 60 days that said they couldn't execute any political people for 60 days. So Socrates is waiting execution for 60 days. And then, then philosophy breaks out in prison. Right. Okay. And in this particular dialogue, Socrates' guys come to him and say, look, nobody really wanted to kill you in the first place, right? They find you annoying, not necessarily dangerous. And we've bribed the guards. And, if you just leave the city and don't come back, no one's going to go looking for you. Okay. Yeah. And in the dialogue, Socrates says, I can't do that because it would be like betraying my parents. Okay. Because Athens is like my parents, right? Athens is what made me great. Okay. And he says, it would be impious to betray my parents.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah. If you're a Christian, he might think it might be breaking a certain commandment, right?
Yeah, exactly. It'd be impious. But the thing is now keep in mind back in the Euthyphro of the dialogue, he's debating this priest Euthyphro who is having his own father executed for murder in a really, really, really sketchy situation where it's not really clear the dad murdered anybody. He basically it was at most manslaughter. It might've been just okay. And Socrates says, but isn't it impious to betray your parents? Okay. So then he and Euthyphro begin to debate piety and it goes nowhere. Right. And then Socrates gets found guilty of impiety. Right. And now he's appealing to piety as a principle of loyalty to the city. Right. And stays in and gets executed.
Yeah.
Okay. Interestingly, now Plato has Socrates in the Republic say, I didn't have to do that. Do you see what I mean? So I think what you're seeing is a rift between Plato and Aristotle.
Yeah.
not between Plato and Socrates, right?
Mhm.
And it's interesting in the Phaedo, Plato goes out of his way to point out that he was not there at Socrates' execution.
Right.
Like the Phaedo is the account of the execution. He goes out of his way to say, "Oh, Plato wasn't there that day. He took ill." Right?
Because he was pissed.
He was pissed. I think he was pissed. I think he thought the old man shouldn't have done it. Right?
Right.
They should have left because Plato himself leaves and tries to go start his own ideal republic in Sicily. It goes badly, right? Almost gets everybody killed, and he leaves. But I think you're seeing here this rift between Socrates and Plato, and it's a question about whether or not we should be optimistic at all of philosophy doing any good whatsoever in the public square.
Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. This is. I think. I think
Sorry, that
this
was long-winded. Yeah.
No,
yeah.
I think it merits its own episode because it's it's such a fascinating theme, right? Yeah, I don't think anybody wants to say that what Socrates was wrong or bad, but I think a lot of people would probably be sympathetic with the idea that it wasn't obligatory.
Wasn't obligatory,
right? Yeah. And of course, there's many things in life, right, that are like super abundantly good but not obligatory, right? Like acts of self-sacrifice and stuff like that. Now, the real interesting thing is that tension that I think you've pointed out between, Plato thinking like, dang, Socrates, you being a fool, right? Yeah. It's like, look at these slobs, right?
It's pearls before swine.
You're going to let these slobs, right? I mean, just imagine so many of politicians these days, right? It's like, you're going to die because of these slobs. You don't owe them anything. That's like Plato's position.
Yeah.
And Socrates.
And keep in mind, Plato's brothers put a hit on half the guys in this dialogue, right? I mean,
right.
You want,
and like as virtuous as you think Socrates is, I have to I just think of like so many of the modern politicians these days and pearls before swine. It's like if that's Plato's point, he's kind of got a point, right?
Yeah.
These people are slobs. They're degenerates, right? They don't deserve Socrates' life, right?
Yeah. And they're going to ally themselves to the dudes behind the walls who can like show the flickering images, right?
Right. Now the flip side, of course, and I think we need to do a separate episode on this is, to my mind, this is where a theological term becomes really important, right? Because if this slice of life is not all there is, and there is the good itself, namely God, who's ultimately in providential control. I don't like to say that all of ethics depends on an extended theology, but an extended theology affects how we think about things ethically. Definitely. Right.
Yeah. It's certainly got to be morally relevant, right?
Hugely, right? So I don't know. Why don't we pause on that?
Yeah, no, definitely. Because this is a good theme. Yeah,
we're going kind of beyond book 7 a little bit.
Exactly, and also it does inform like my whole spooky read of the Republic, right? Which I think I can justify it, right?
Right. Yeah. So the listeners can let us know what they think about that in the comment section. Let's take a few questions here. I actually have to teach a random course today in a little bit, so it can't be too long. But let's see what we got.
Let's do it.
All right. Brendan says, Andrew Willard Jones wrote a book about the history of humanity in light of Christian politics and established 2 cities, a city of man that looks down and a city of God that looks up. Where do you think Plato's Republic fits in such a paradigm? The city of God for Willard is, of course, human, but one that is ordered by the things of God. Jim, what are your thoughts on this?
I'm not aware of Willard's book, but I mean, like, that city of God, city of man distinction goes back to St. Augustine, and I think, I think I would be willing to bet that Augustine has something like the Republic in mind.
He had to, of course he did.
Yeah. Now I'm not sure what texts he has in front of him, but he's filtered through the Neoplatonists pretty deeply, right?
Yeah.
And so I think Plato would say, or at least the Socrates of the Republic would say, I think what Plato says is always a very difficult question, right? I think what Socrates of the Republic would say is, though not the Socrates of the Crito, right? The Socrates of the Republic, well, maybe, but Socrates of the Republic would say is, look, the city of man will always be flawed, right? It's in the cave. Like the city of man is in the cave, and you are on the cave's territory there, right? Mm-hmm. And you were in the sophists' territory. You're in the den of sophists, right? So that will always be flawed. And what is best for you is to look away from it. Okay. In this city of the ideal city, right? The perfect city, the city run by the philosopher king, which though for us is very hard to recognize, and even the Descartes of the dialogue as perfect. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it. So once again, we only have opinion about it really. Okay. Is outside the cave. Like the city of God and the city of man are not the same thing. And it seems for Plato that, or the Socrates of the Republic, the union of them is not achievable, right? For Plato of the Republic, to pursue the city of God, to pursue the ideal city, is to turn away from the cave. It's to turn away from the city of man, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's important. Okay, so I think he's very, very pessimistic, right, about this.
Yeah, good. You know, it's one of those things where the sort of the intersection or the additional consideration of revelation in Christianity, I think, I mean, it's really interesting to see like what notes of intelligibility this adds to it, especially things like if you just assume, even just for the sake of thought experiment, like the doctrine of original sin. It fits really well with a lot of this pessimism, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Helps to explain a lot, but
Yeah.
also can help you to become a more longer term optimist as well.
Yeah.
in
I
certain
mean,
regards,
there's
right?
something like, something like original sin, and like with a double underline in, early in the Republic, where, Socrates blames the whole drama on this inexorable tendency to do better,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
Which is always to get more than you deserve, to want more than your place, right? Yeah. And
Mhm.
so, right.
Yeah, I mean, Chesterton was pretty clear. He's like
Yeah.
the most obvious doctrine of any philosophical religious system is original sin. I mean,
Yeah.
just read the morning newspaper. Right?
Yeah. And this is, I think this is important, and this is a hint for another episode, right? But, I think Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics is taught from the perspective that we're in the cave, like it or not.
Mhm.
And it's sort of like, so he says, look, we're young people, because these are lecture notes, young people, we're doing politics here, right? We have to learn to live with each other. And then immediately next section, you get a critique of Plato, of Plato's form of the good, right? And so I think Aristotle's saying is, yeah, be that as it may, you all have to run this city. Let's talk about how to do that.
Yeah,
Right?
which is why we will be doing the ethics after this.
Yes,
It'll be a nice,
definitely.
nice point, counterpoint. All right, Jim, let's finish with this. Let's get your thoughts on Fury and Wilder. Did you at least catch the highlights?
I have not yet. I'm kind of grouchy about it.
So
I didn't get it. I didn't get the fight, and I'm kicking myself. And I think I told Pat, was it the other day, yesterday maybe, that instead of it, we watched the free UFC thing that was on, and watched Mackenzie Dern, one of our favorites, get her butt kicked. Right. So I'm like, it was a double whammy. Yeah. So
yeah,
I didn't see it. Right. And I'm told it was like one of the greatest athletic events of all time.
Yeah, I've actually had a few people email me about it. And again, I'm by no means an expert commentator on boxing or stuff like that. I don't even follow boxing all that closely. And this was one of the rare times I actually got the pay-per-view. But it was like providential because it wound up being, it was probably certainly the best boxing match I've ever seen in my lifetime. Maybe even the single most exciting sporting event. And yeah, I mean, I already gave my thoughts, but it's just the thing about I got a couple emails of people's additional commentary on this, and like I think everybody agrees that Fury is just an incredible technician. The size of this guy and the way he moves, it's like he's in the Matrix. It's incredible.
Yeah.
The thing about Deontay is he started out a little more technical, and then he kind of got shook up a little bit. And then he just kind of like went back into his default, like, let's just rely on my eraser of a right hand, right?
Yeah.
Type of thing, like, which is always like scary and threatening with a dude that has that much power. It's like, even when he's wobbly, even when you think he's going down, he just needs that one good hit, right? And that's kind of what you saw in this fight. There was a number of times when Fury was bringing the heat, and I thought it was going to be over, but then Deontay did clip him pretty good, and then Fury went down. And you're just like, dang. So the whole time, it just like, it could have gone either way, which to me is just like the most awesome, sweet tension you can expect out of a contest like that.
That's great. That's great.
So yeah, I don't know. The thing is, I don't think you can with maybe somebody knows better than I do. I don't know if you can rewatch a pay-per-view. I tried to rewind it when I was watching it before just to recatch some of it, and it wouldn't let me. So I don't even know if I have like the ability to access the replay or anything.
So I know the UFC stuff on ESPN2, the pay-per-view stuff they put up for free like 2 weeks later.
Oh, do they really? Interesting.
If you're willing to wait a couple weeks, if you have an ESPN2 subscription,
I don't.
They'll put it up as part of your regular, because like you get the regular Saturday night fights as part of the ESPN2 subscription, and then like the numbered pay-per-views. If you're willing to wait a couple weeks, maybe it might even be longer than that, but they eventually come up in the archives there. Right.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So
okay. Yeah, I don't have that. I just got this. From
so we used
Fox.
to always just, oh, we're not going to bother paying for the fight.
Yeah.
We would just, get it that way legally. Right.
Mhm.
But then, I think I've told you, my good wife is, if she is MMA addicted, right? so like if Dana White is selling, Jen is buying, so we get the fights. Yeah.
Yeah. Good stuff.
I'm not complaining, by the way. Yeah.
Sweet. All right. Well, we'll wrap this one up here.
Yeah.
So stay tuned, gentle listeners. Obviously, you have your homework. Read the next book, and we'll be getting that one done at least by next week. And Jim,
Yeah,
as always,
definitely.
thank you for your excellent lesson. It's
Thank you, man. Thank
super
you.
appreciated. And
I appreciate it.
listeners, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. You know that helps us out. We'll catch you next time. Peace.